Thank you.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. So I actually didn't expect it to be like on here interviewing Elizabeth Stark today. I'm probably the least technical guy in this room right now.
You had some pretty technical questions, so I disagree with that.
I mean, these are like, the people in this room are really cool, and they're like a different crowd than I'm used to. Right? We used to orange pill people. These people are already full of pills. You are junkies. Right, so let's get started with the first question. And we have, the timer is not working. How many minutes do we have? All right, let's get started with the first question. You're here in Asia, in Vietnam. What do you see like from the astronomical view? How is Lightning adoption doing here around in Asia, and what implications will it have on the emerging economies?
First off, it's so cool to be here in Vietnam. This is my first time here. I've spent time in Southeast Asia before, but to really see the energy, the excitement, the growth here has been incredible. My understanding is Vietnam is actually the #1 country for quote-unquote crypto adoption, according to stats. So it is, and Bitcoin being a major part of that. So clearly, this is a really important area for Lightning. And basically the way that I think about the growth of the Lightning Network, and we're going to talk about a lot here, I'm really excited to hear the questions from the audience as well, is this is not a technology for any one particular country, right? It's not something, say, just for the US, just for Europe. A lot of people in the US building technologies are focused on, say, Silicon Valley or New York or these places within the country. Lightning and Bitcoin are global, and that's what makes them so powerful. And the way that I look at it, Lightning has enabled 2 different types of use cases. I've talked about this quite a bit in the past. The first is use cases that weren't previously possible. So things like machine-to-machine payments or ZAPs, which we'll get to shortly, new types of, say, micropayments or embedded payments on the internet. And the second is access for those who previously did not have it or who didn't have as much access. And emerging markets are such a key part of that. And so we have identified 3 major areas of growth. Southeast Asia being a really important one, significant here with the community today. Sub-Saharan Africa. I know we heard yesterday from KG from Machankura, a lot of really interesting development going on there. You have Kala, you have Bitnab, a number of other folks building in that community, Bitcoin Mountain in Cameroon, Bitcoin Akasi in South Africa, and then you have the Latin American community. I'm sure folks have heard about El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender and Lightning. You have a number of communities that have evolved there. So getting to Southeast Asia, what I think is here so interesting is that you have a high degree of, say, mobile phone usage, right? You have good connectivity. And you have the ability to send cross-border payments with Bitcoin and Lightning, and you have economies where they're sending cross-borders. And clearly the legacy systems, and we'll talk a lot about how they're failing, because they're failing right now. They've been failing for a while, but they're failing even more so today than they have been, arguably. And you have communities of developers. Here in Da Nang, there's a strong developer community, a strong startup community. And you have people building these solutions together with the adoption of mobile technology that enables Bitcoin and Lightning to take force. So for example, we were just chatting about Bob. I actually learned about Bob from Twitter. Sometimes you're just like browsing Twitter and you find another Lightning community, and that's what happened back in October. And I saw that Bob in Bangkok, Thailand, had a Lightning node operator workshop. And you were there, and I want to hear about it.
I was there.
And I sent it to the team at Lightning Labs, including Lucas, who's on our team, and I said, wait, why didn't we know about this? Like, we missed this. What's going on here? Find out. And one of the things that we're really passionate about doing is reaching out to these local community organizers and then finding out how we can help and what they've been working on. So actually, I want to ask you a question. Can you tell us about these workshops, and specifically the node operator workshop? Because that was back in October 2nd, I believe, at Bob.
Well, Bob is a really cool project. Jim, which is, I think he's probably still drunk from yesterday.
We all had fun last night.
Right, so we hold these workshops. It just started last year. We hold these monthly, sometimes weekly workshops on topics like Bitcoin, custodial, Lightning, node running, development stuff like that. And we had people come from all over to Bangkok to participate. We did a workshop on node running with our residents node operator. We have my colleague, a doctor, who really got into Bitcoin, and he really delves into node running. And before he knew it, he was running one of the most liquid node in Southeast Asia. So we have that. He mostly talks about how hard it is, or like how LND keep breaking on him. But yeah,
I saw the notes. Well, I also liked the notes were in English and Thai. I was like, oh, good, I can understand
I see, yeah.
some of what's going on. And the leader of the workshop is a doctor?
He's a psychiatrist, retired, very old, but also very technical. And we do have like a growing community there. Here, a few network engineers join in the course, and we have a few experts. I'm actually working with them to help introduce a Lightning payment system to shops around Bangkok. One of my friends here is opening a coffee shop who's going to be accepting Lightning when we get back. Right.
Very cool. I think what this gets to as well is the power of community and the grassroots nature and the organic nature of what we have all been building. We just on Twitter discover new communities all the time that we hadn't even heard of. And the nature of Bitcoin and Lightning is obviously no one controls it. There's no top-down approach. Nobody needs permission to organize a local meetup or a workshop or run a node or anything like that, and it will remain that way. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, in one weekend, there was a meetup in Medellin, Colombia, and Hyderabad, India, that same weekend for Lightning. And I sent it, I just, again, happened to find them on Twitter. I guess I'm searching for the right things. Sent it to the Lightning Labs team, and I'm like, oh, we didn't even know about these. Sri Lanka had a Lightning meetup a couple months back that we found. And to me, what's so significant and important is these local communities are using Bitcoin and Lightning and discovering it. They're running nodes. They're integrating Lightning. They're using wallets and so on and so forth because it serves a need for them and because they're passionate about it, right? With Bitcoin, we don't control these folks. They do it because they love it. They do it out of passion. The way that I look at Lightning, it is really about building a movement where people are all part of it and all contribute. And that's very different from a lot of what you see in the broader quote-unquote crypto sphere. So for example, there are a number of funds out there with, say, tokens, shitcoins, however you want to refer to them, where people will give out $100 million and nothing actually gets done. And people are not organically involved, and they're not doing so because they're passionate about it. They're doing so because somebody's giving them a shitcoin, which is a very different environment than that of Bitcoin and Lightning. And to me, that's what makes our community so special and so powerful.
It's like most of the developments are coming from the users. People, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, again, this is a participatory movement, but so we heard yesterday from Koji, from Diamond Hands, who's running now the second largest node operator community, extremely impressive. And one of the things that we saw develop over, since COVID pandemic, past two-ish, a little bit more years, was the advent of node operator communities, right? And what was so powerful about this, you have PlebNet, you have Rings of Fire, you have Diamond Hands, a number of others, is these are all people that are operating a node. They're actually figuring out strategies. They're all talking to each other. They're on various Telegram channels and Discord and so on and so forth. But it's extremely peer-to-peer, right? It's not at all top-down. They've developed a variety of different strategies or trading tips. There are members of PlebNet, some of whom had barely used a computer, which is incredible, before they started running a node, and now they're like node operator experts. So again, what we've seen is people that are so passionate about this are able to engage in node operator communities, look at liquidity strategies, we can get to that as well, and participate, which to us, I mean, I think we thought that node operators, would evolve, but the specific community aspect where people joined a community was something somewhat new to us back then, which I think is really interesting, where you're like, you have you're a member of one of these communities and you identify with it, and that's really powerful.
I think I'd like to take a step back and rewind a bit. I mean, I've just learned from a few moments ago that Lightning, when we heard of Lightning Labs, since you are like the first guy who did the daemon that everyone can use, I was under the impression that it's probably a big organization with top-down approach, going funding communities and stuff like that. You were 29 people, right? What?
29, 30, depending.
or sometimes you don't even know. Yeah, but what was the inspiration? How do you get into Lightning in the first place? How did Lightning Labs come to be? I know this is probably a basic question, but I just want to know.
Yeah, so you're not the only person. I've had people come up to me and say, wait, you're not like 500 people? And I have a philosophy around, especially when it comes to protocol development, that I actually think if you have way too many protocol developers, it's actually not a good thing. And if you look at something like a Bitcoin Core and the number of full-time developers, right, you don't necessarily want 1,000 full-time Bitcoin Core developers. And that's a longer discussion, but I think you can do a lot with a highly passionate and productive group of small people. And this goes counter to the idea that more software developers means greater productivity. And there's something called Brooks' Law in software development that actually posits that with each developer you add to a project, the timeline gets pushed out even further because of things like communication overhead. People need to talk to each other and they need to get up to speed, and then that slows other people down. So there's a lot of interesting kind of research around this. But with regard to Lightning Labs, so first started in 2016, so it's incredible. It's been quite a while. I first met Lalo, aka Roast Beef, our CTO and my co-founder, at an SF Bitcoin Devs meetup in 2015. And I remember he told me at the time he wanted to do his thesis because he was getting a thesis in applied cryptography on the Lightning Network. And I was already interested in the Lightning Network. I was going to developer meetups in San Francisco. There were really strong communities at meetups. I mean, there still are. There's SF Bitcoin Devs, there's New York Bit Devs, there are Bit Devs now in a variety of cities around the world, which is really cool to see. And that's how so many of us met each other. Again, the power of community and the power of developer community. So he told me he wanted to do research on the Lightning Network, and I was like, okay, I'm excited about this Lightning thing. Like, I need to talk to this guy. I need to meet him. Turns out he did his research on encrypted search, but I convinced him to work with us, and I said, we don't have any money, and I want to start this company, but we'll pay you later. And somehow he agreed, so that worked out well. So thank you, Lalo. He studied applied cryptography. And then after grad school, he actually built the first version of LND during his grad school break and worked on some of the code there. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. I mean, for those that may not be familiar, I highly recommend reading Johnny Beer's Block Size Wars book. But to think that, from 2015 really onward to 2017, Bitcoin was under constant attack. There were so many times where a lot of us were concerned that Bitcoin, might not survive in the way in which we wanted it to survive, that there were all these interests that were trying to attack it from a variety of fronts, and people that thought that you could just get in a back room and make decisions for Bitcoin, which is clearly not how Bitcoin works. And with regard to Lightning, segregated witness was a key component of building out, Lightning implementations. We always had that in LND. The other implementations always had it. And we didn't know if that was going to activate because there were certain, people that were, did not want to, say, activate the self-fork for Bitcoin. But yeah, read the book from Johnny. But at the end of the day, we've been through so much within the community. And once SegWit activated, and that really unlocked the ability to, for Lightning and to start building out the protocol and to start developing the community, we just saw people. I remember early on, there were all these French devs. Like, Lightning was big in France, and they started building apps on Lightning. And this is the pre-mainnet days. So I don't know if anybody here was using Lightning on testnet. I don't know if Peter's in the room, but he was definitely using Lightning on testnet. But
I think they were hashtag reckless back then.
Yeah, exactly. People were then turning on mainnet
I was one of them.
Oh, really? Nice. Okay, old school. And we were like, no, we don't want you guys to lose money. And there was people like drama in Bitcoin and Lightning. There was some back and forth there. But in 2018, for LND, we released the beta, and we saw mainnet for Core Lightning, C Lightning, and also Eclair from Async. And that was the year that it was the very early mainnet, right? Mm-hmm. So it's been 5 years, which is like, I don't even know what year it is anymore, right? Like in the post-COVID world. But we've seen so much progress since then. And for example, Suheb, who's on the Lightning Labs team, and also if you're familiar with Ride the Lightning, he's built that together with Shahana, his wife, recently quoted at Lightning Labs that from the River report that 98% of payments, according to River's recent report, tend to be successful for your average payment, right? So we're not at 100, but in terms of River's data, that's somewhat impressive. The stats for credit card transactions are 88% or below. So we're already 10% above credit card transactions, which I think is good. But of course, we want to be way higher than 98%. But in the early days, I don't know how many people in the room use Lightning in the early days, but it was definitely not 98%, right? Because of liquidity requirements, because of the need for inbound capacity. So we've seen a lot of evolution over the past couple of years in terms of usability. We heard yesterday from Leo as well around kind of the evolution of Lightning usability and what's ahead. And to me, it works today, right? Mm-hmm. And happy to talk more about all the use cases that are making it work.
Yeah, before we get to that, I just want to mention something about growth. I mean, we've seen amazing growth this year, I think. I mean, looking back past year, using Lightning hasn't been this easy. I just asked Peter Todd earlier about full RBF thing because accepting zero confirmations transaction used to be something that I value, but then I just realized that I haven't been using that at all for like the past year because Lightning just works and it's so much better. But it hasn't always been the case. Do you see where's the trajectories of the growth? Is it exponential? People are just building on other people, and it keeps going like that.
So I'm a big fan of Lynn Alden, if folks have heard of her in the room, and highly recommend her piece on network effects. I mean, she also wrote a very long-form piece on the Lightning Network. I gave her some quotes. I gave her feedback on that as well.
We translated the piece into Thai.
Oh, amazing. With the network effects one or the Lightning one?
The Lightning one,
okay.
not the
yeah.
Okay. I'll do the other one soon.
All right, yeah. So Lynn talks about the importance of network effects. And as we know, Bitcoin has a network effect, in terms of the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem and community. It's the most secure blockchain by far. It has the most value. It has by far the most users. And then Lightning has this network effect on top of Bitcoin. And one thing that I think is really significant about the Lightning Network is that, it's hard to get Bitcoiners to agree on anything, right? The style of the community is we like to have arguments, but Bitcoin, by and large, agreed on the Lightning Network protocol as a standard for payments. Now, of course, there are other, layer 2 protocols and sidechains and whatnot, but by and large, a community has adopted this, right? And you have the Bolt spec, and so you have interoperability between the various implementations. Now there are, 4 or 5 or so of those out there. And that's very different than what you see in a lot of other communities out there where everyone wants to build their own wall garden layer 2. And of course, there's a token because there's always a shitcoin. Mm-hmm. Not so with
really
Bitcoin and Lightning.
Those.
So to me, that nature of the interoperability, the agreement of the protocol, and significantly, anybody can build on top of Lightning. Anybody can build their own Lightning implementation. Anyone can build, an application on it. Anybody can run a node. That's really significant. And what we've seen in terms of growth is this network effect evolving, where the more liquidity there is on the network, and we have the node operator communities, and we have integrations of Lightning and people onboarding, that then contributes back to this positive feedback loop, right? A virtuous cycle, if you will. And so, for example, just in the past week, Wallet of Satoshi, I know we have those folks in the room, has had close to 30,000 Lightning transactions per day. I believe it's 28,604 on average.
How
Check
do you
that
measure
stat
that?
out.
How do you measure that?
They post the stats.
I see.
Yeah. So about 30,000 transactions per day, and that has been continually growing. Nostr and Zaps, clearly a part of that. I know a lot of Nostr users are using Wallet of Satoshi. And you have, that's just one wallet, that's just one service on Lightning. And today, Bitcoin on-chain has, on average, about 300,000 transactions per day, right? And the nature of Lightning is we don't have a global number of transactions because it is private and because, you don't have a global view of transactions, which also makes it scale. But we're at the point, and I actually said this to my team in early February, I said, I'm looking at these stats. We're either really close or at parity with Bitcoin on-chain transactions, right? Now, of course, the nature of Lightning is the amount of transactions are going to be, smaller than you have on-chain. But I believe we're getting close, if not at, the volume of on-chain transactions, and by the end of the year, we will exceed it, which is how Lightning is working, because people are going off-chain. People are using, layer 2 transactions for small value payments, for cross-border payments, for the instant low fee nature of it. So to me, the kind of, you could call this a flippening of sorts, right? Between Lightning and on-chain is really significant, and we're seeing that happen as we speak.
It's interesting when I talk to my other, I would say normal people, like shitcoin friends, right? They would mention like Lightning has been around for so many years, but has only been able to gather 5,000 Bitcoin. And I was like, that's not really how it works.
Yeah, that's a great question and point, and one that I often make. Okay, so if you look at total value locked and DeFi protocols, what are people doing with that? They're not transacting, right? They're parking, their shitcoins there, and they want to yield, and they're staking, and there are all sorts of things that they're doing.
Basically, just rent seeking.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a whole house of cards that comes along with that, which we've seen fall recently. But it's not about utility. And again, to go back to Lynn's work, Lynn talks a lot about the utility versus speculation ratio, right? How much utility are you getting out of this technology versus just using it for pure speculation? And then it's kind of, with DeFi protocols, you have tokens on tokens on tokens, right? It's tokens all the way down. And with Lightning, the nature of the total amount of Bitcoin on the network is not to just park it there and do nothing. You want to be routing. Funds are inefficient on Lightning if they don't move, right? You want funds to constantly be moving because as a node operator, that's how you earn fees. If you don't earn any fees, you're not running a good node. So the way that I think about the funds on Lightning, first of all, it's apples versus oranges in terms of the comparison between a TVL and a DeFi protocol. It's also Bitcoin, which is not something that you just get in an airdrop or you can stake and get rewards for. So that's also significant. But you actually want funds on Lightning to be moving as efficiently and quickly as possible. So, in terms of liquidity and routing, theoretically, you could have, say, 100 million, 200 million USD worth of Bitcoin in the network, and those funds could turn over, every minute, every 30 seconds. We're not there yet today. But the way that I foresee it is you want maximum capital efficiency on Lightning, because that's actually how you earn routing fees. Whereas, again, if you have funds parked in DeFi protocol, you're just getting more shitcoins on top of shitcoins. So with Lightning, it's not about how much Bitcoin is on the network, it's about how efficiently that capital is allocated. And so I highly recommend following Alex Bosworth, otherwise known as Boz, team member at Lightning Labs, very prolific in the community, talking to node operators, working on liquidity. And Alex has always talked about the concept of really where funds are located. You can also check out the Boz score named after him in terms of routing nodes on Lightning Terminal and how efficiently allocated is your capital. Do you have good node uptime? Do you have good centrality within the network? And with regard to placing funds in the network, if you have a node that has like 2 really bad channels to a node that is not connected to anyone, well, that's not useful capital in the network, right? So you can have a node with less capital, and Alex, again, is always optimizing for this, but with the right channels that is well located, and you can route a lot more payments and then earn, a much better yield in terms of routing fees than if your node is, has more capital but is off in the middle of nowhere. So again, it's an apples versus oranges comparison, because on Lightning, you want the most efficient capital, and you want that capital to always be moving, right? So you want high velocity of capital in a way, because we're facilitating transactions and payments. So I believe you can do billions of dollars of volume with less than that in terms of total capital on the network. And again, people are going to, be using like incentives and game mechanics and whatnot in terms of putting their capital in the network and then figuring out how to either earn a yield or, have utility with Lightning in terms of facilitating payments.
I think about last year or 2 years ago, there was an article claiming people can earn like 10% yield by just opening a Lightning node, and that kind of got a lot of people running Umbro. And
10%.
It was an article that kind of like got a whole bunch of normies into running nodes, which most of them became zombie nodes. This is one of the topics I like to touch on. Is that do you think these kind of movements are net positive? We had this question also yesterday for the system. Or do you think like node operators should be like professional node operators? And would that contribute to the centralization and would lead to censorship in the future?
Really good question. So first of all, I don't believe node operators earning 10%, so I'm not familiar with that article.
No.
The way that I think about it is,
no one gets that.
Bitcoin and Lightning are for everyone. It is true that running, a highly efficient node, especially one of the larger nodes, is intensive and time-consuming today. There's still a good amount of manual work involved in terms of, managing liquidity. One of the things that we're really focused on at Lightning Labs is around automation. For example, for Loop, which helps to get inbound or outbound capacity using submarine swaps, we now have auto loop
cool.
Via Lightning Terminal, and the evolution is today it's still quite manual. I do believe in the future we're moving toward a much more automated liquidity environment, where with regard to getting inbound capacity or a variety of means to approach liquidity, it will be automated, but we're not yet there today. But to your question around more I'd say professional node operators or people that are just doing it for the passion, I think we need both, right? If Lightning is just, very large companies, using AWS, that doesn't really espouse the spirit of Bitcoin and Lightning. And we've seen a lot of node operators contribute, in these communities very positively to the network and educate each other. Now, yes, if you don't manage liquidity and have a zombie node and leave it on and don't touch it, that's also not ideal. But I actually think even that is valuable, because that person has now learned about Bitcoin and Lightning, has more knowledge, might come to a workshop at Bob and tell their friends, and that's really valuable. So I don't think it's an either or. The evolution is we will have both. Is running a small node going to be a profit-making enterprise? That remains to be seen. But to me, there's an incredible amount of value in the educational process and kind of getting to know the network and being a part of it.
I think automation would be the logical next step. I mean, LNDG has been the lifesaver for the past year. Right, so we have 17 minutes. Let's get to Nostr. We've seen a rise in the usage of Nostr, and that also contributes to the rise in usage of Zaps, as in Lightning payments on Nostr. Right? Nostr is developed by the Lightning community. Do you see like this is one of the example of where things are going? What do you see happening in the future?
Yeah, so it doesn't come as a big surprise that the number of key developers from the Nostr community came out of the Lightning community, because they espouse similar viewpoints and perspectives, particularly around open source development, around open protocols, around the ability for anybody to build on top of it, things like decentralization. So yeah, to me, the internet has evolved to have so many walled gardens. This is one of the things that just got me into Bitcoin in the first place. Like, I do not like the idea of a walled garden. Why should one company control your social network? Oh, Twitter shuts down your account? maybe you send them a support message, good luck, right? And I know a number of people have had that happen. We've seen things like censorship across these platforms. We've seen a number of issues. And you're also locked in. It's like, okay, what if I want to move from one social network like Twitter to a different social network? Can I take my followers with me? Nope, that's not how it works. So one thing that I think is so powerful about the Nostr protocol is finally having an open messaging platform for the internet where you can take your followers with you, where anybody can build on top of it, where you have interoperability and you have different clients that talk to each other, which is really within the philosophy of the internet itself, like the philosophy of the web.
How it should be.
Right. And I'd been waiting for something like this. So, there have been a variety of other approaches, Mastodon, there's Blue Sky being worked on by folks at Twitter. But one of the key areas for me with Nostr is its simplicity. It's actually, an elegant but simple protocol. And it's also kind of something that Sophia Jaff, coming out of the Lightning community, worked on it. Then, we have Will from Damas. But people, I think, are just iterating and moving so quickly. And they're not focused on perfection. They're focused on shipping and building. And having, gotten on Nostr just to see this pace of development, like there was a point at which, NIP57, which is the equivalent of BIPs, the proposals for Nostr for Zaps, was constantly evolving. It hadn't even been integrated into a bunch of clients, and it was kind of clunky. And then, like several days later, people updated whichever app or client they were using, now your Zaps worked, right? So the way that I see it, the ability to have Lightning payments within social networks and messaging protocols is also really significant and can help address issues like bots and spam. And by the way, there are a lot of bots on Nostr. Yeah. But if you look at Nostr.band, which has stats, they actually have stats on what they call high quality accounts. And they're taking the bots out, and they're able to use a PageRank like algorithm to see who's connected to whom, and these are likely to be better non-bot accounts. But something like Zaps also can address that. So Jack Dorsey, founder of Twitter, founder and CEO of Block, has been big on Nostr. If anybody's here on Nostr, I'm sure they've seen Jack post. And he made a comment about likes are useless. And a zap is a more meaningful like, and you can send a one-sat zap, right? So it's not like you need to be rich to be sending zaps. But
I've been doing that for the past few months, and it's
one-sat
really
zaps.
amazing. No, more like 21-sat zap.
Oh, nice! I've gotten some of those, right? Yeah. And the idea that you can send, a fraction of a U.S. cent, and we can do the calculation between dong and one sat, is significant, right? And that wasn't possible previously, before Lightning. And people are now engaging and using this protocol for a much more open Twitter-type application. I believe, though, that Twitter, or a Twitter-like application is only the beginning of what a protocol like Nostr will enable. And having an open messaging protocol on the internet will have all sorts of other use cases that we just have not even seen yet, and we might not even know today. There are a variety of Bitcoin-related ones that might just need the messaging component but aren't necessarily social media oriented. Some people built like a Reddit-type app using Nostr as well, and a variety of different approaches there. But from my perspective, the internet needs an open messaging protocol, and it needs a value component, and that's what Lightning and Zaps provides. And if you look at the graphs, so we saw yesterday in the Alby talk of Zaps, right? And it's like, okay, Zap number go up, and people are engaging. Like it's if someone likes your post, you're like, someone sends you a Zap, you're like, oh wow, that's like, really cool.
Nowadays, when I post something on Twitter that I think it's kind of cool, I would most definitely put that on Nostr to get some Zaps.
Well, and by the way, so if Elon were smart, he would integrate Nostr into Twitter. Now, I don't know if he's going to do it. He at once tried to ban people from posting their Nostr profiles and then quickly rolled that back. You should not do that. But I believe, the future is going to be interoperability. The future is going to be open messaging protocols. And the sooner a platform like Twitter gets on board with that, the better it will be for the ability to talk to everyone, bring your followers with you, and really have the internet, open internet approach to messaging and social media.
Yeah, I mean, the ability to send sats fast and easily and efficiently, it just changes a lot of things. I mean, there are developments like, Fountain app, podcast 2.0, stuff like that, and they take a different approach. And I thought it would kind of like, separate and fragment the market, but it doesn't, because you can just move your sats where you want to, right?
Well, yeah, and so you hear a lot about this concept of the creator economy, and that's part of where everything from Nostr to the value for value protocol, including Fountain, podcasting 2.0, fits in, because it's like, okay, if you're a podcaster or you're a content creator in any place around the world and you have a community and you have followers, they want to send you, say, sats, but if they're going through the traditional, financial system, well, good luck sending $1 from Vietnam to, say, Mexico, right? And that's even in a US dollar component, so I don't know. 24,000 Vietnamese dong, right? So that's what Bitcoin and Lightning really enable and make possible for a lot of people that want these, alternate revenue streams and want the ability to have communities and have, say, fans across the world. So really exciting to see that evolve. And I know there are a number of podcasters that have gotten on, say, Fountain, Podcasting 2.0, using this value for value protocol that are now, earning from podcasting. And they're also able to see, so within the protocols, people will send sats at like a particular point in time in the podcast. And that's also an interesting and meaningful metric in terms of like, people really liked this segment of the podcast as well.
We're running out of time, and there's so many topics.
I know, I was like, this is such a long session, and I'm like, no, I need more time.
Yeah, I was worried at first. But then, there's so many questions I want to ask, but I think we have to save time for questions and answers. So I'll just wrap this up and bring us back to the topic of Lightning in Asia, right? So what do you think were the limitations or things that an obstacle to Lightning adoption here in Asia? And do you think Lightning Labs could play a role or to support that?
At the end of the day, I believe it comes down to utility. Are we building technology that is useful for people? And, is it going to improve their lives, right? One of the things I like to talk about is, solving real problems for real people. And that's something that I think a lot of other communities within the broader cryptosphere have lost sight of, right? And that's something that I know people here really care about, and hearing about these use cases and hearing about, the challenges, right? So we heard from Leo. I mean, the UX is not 100% there yet. I've talked about this a lot, but in the future, I foresee, a world in which, people might not even know about Lightning. They're just transacting, right? So, the ability to have, say, assets on Bitcoin and Lightning is also a way to bring in many, many more people, both to the technology, with Bitcoin as the most secure blockchain and Lightning as, the layer 2 with the network effects on top of it. But for example, if you have, say, dollar stable coins on Bitcoin or Lightning, I believe that's a significant way to onboard people to Bitcoin. Because there are a lot of people, say, living in hyperinflation, living in environments where they don't have access to traditional financial services, but they do have a mobile phone across, especially emerging markets, that all they know of today, they know of dollars, they want access to it. It's also interesting as well with the evolving macro environment where, seeing the growing importance of Bitcoin. I mean, I've always believed Bitcoin is important. That's why I spend my life on it. But now we're seeing this become a major factor in the broader macro environment. I believe also the next halving in 2024, and a little bit over a year, is going to be a major event globally from the macro standpoint. But getting back to kind of usability in the community, making this technology usable, so standards and interoperability, there are a variety of different approaches even to things like invoices that we've heard about. So the ability to converge on that, I think, is key. There will always be different standards and people will adopt what they adopt, but at the end of the day, we need wallets to talk to each other, right? We saw with Nostr the advent of, people using Lightning address. It's human readable. There are obviously pros and cons to that approach as well.
I was hesitant. I mean, yeah.
But for your average user, an invoice is complicated. And a QR code yeah, that might work as well, but a Lightning address is, at the end of the day, an easy way to onboard people, and we've seen its success. And shout out to Andre Neves, the creator of Lightning Address from Zebedee, who's always been super passionate about usability. So we've seen the advent of that. Machankura also uses Lightning Address because when you're using feature phones and T9, old school, that's, you can't paste an invoice in there, right?
Yeah.
So seeing the evolution of those approaches and really focusing on the use cases and the ability to onboard people in a way that works for them and in their local communities. Like, what works for a community in Latin America might be different in Thailand or Vietnam or, Philippines. But at the end of the day, it all talks to Bitcoin and Lightning. And I think that's what's so key. It's all globally interoperable. And anybody can build these solutions, and that's part of why we win.
And when they build it, it runs and it interprets with everything. Yeah.
And by the way, empowering local communities to build. So, hearing about what Bob is doing with the developer residency, I think is super exciting. So shout out to Bob, really excited to see what comes out of that. And then, for example, in Africa, there's Kala, Q-A-L-A, which is doing Bitcoin and Lightning developer training. We have Jimmy in the room, who's done really awesome education for Bitcoin developers. So finding people in all of these local communities that are learning how to build on Bitcoin and Lightning, that are developers, that are building these apps and solutions for the communities is so key, and we're seeing more and more of that.
Solving real problems. Yeah.
Exactly. All right,
Right,
we have like 5 minutes for questions, but...
Let's have some questions.
And you guys can have 10. It's, we can go over. So
okay.
It's not a hard stop here. So yeah, let's open up the floor to some questions. I'm sure there's a handful of people who will have some questions. So don't everybody starts with the elbow and then shoulder, then a little bit higher. That's how it starts. Mm-hmm. Come on, guys. A lot of questions here. We got Muzz over here. Let's get the microphone in Muzz's hands here. Oh yeah.
Do you see the implementations of Lightning competing with one another?
So, as mentioned, I think one of the key aspects of Lightning is the interoperability, right? And that's what makes it so powerful. And if there were just one implementation, that would not be a good thing. And one of the differences between Lightning and even, on-chain is you don't have a consensus layer in Lightning, whereas you do have that logic on-chain. And people like to debate the nature of various implementations on-chain, but to me, you want and you need multiple implementations for it to be a strong and resilient network. You don't want to be reliant, on a single one. So, different implementations offer, different pros and cons and different benefits. With LND, our goal has been to really make it easy to build applications on top of it and make it easier to run a node. Whereas, customizability has been something that other implementations have focused on. Mobile and wallets has been something other folks have focused on. But at the end of the day, I see the Lightning community as really competing against the fiat system and the broader financial system. So instead of us competing against each other, I see us as one group against a much bigger and competitor, if you will. Now, of course, the nature of the community is not everyone's going to agree all the time. That's Bitcoin, right? And I think there are many healthy debates that are really important, and we're not always going to be able to. For example, with LND, we're hard at work at implementing features. Our latest release, which is shipping, I think early next week, fingers crossed,
Version 16.
had 0.16. We had 55 total contributors, which is really cool. It's the highest number ever. Also, shout out to Lucas from Lightning Labs, who's been doing the LND PR Review Club, modeled after the Bitcoin Core PR Review Club, to get more developers. We have folks like Jonathan and YY in the room from Lightning Labs who've hosted these PR review clubs and helped out and participated to get more developers building on Bitcoin and Lightning and specifically contributing to the protocol. But at the end of the day, I don't see it as we're all pitted against each other. I see it as we're a community against a much broader competitor. Even though we're not always going to agree, but that's good. I don't think we should always agree.
Yep, good question, good answer. And then we got Jimmy next with a follow-up question.
Yeah, so thanks for the talk. We're seeing a lot of deplatforming of exchanges and so on, and we but at the same time, we're seeing the rise of Nostr and Lightning and stuff like that. What are your views on sort of the more decentralized versions of, converting Bitcoin directly to fiat currency and so on? And how do you think that develops as this ecosystem grows?
So when you say decentralized versions, are you talking about to fiat, like stable coins?
Yeah.
But
Well,
stable
not
coins or
not
fiat?
stable coins, but like just sort of peer-to-peer exchanging.
Okay, got it.
And
So like
stuff like
Paxful.
Yeah.
Got it. So Paxful is a platform for peer-to-peer exchanging of, Bitcoin to fiat. They integrated Lightning a couple years back. Really great folks there, and really focus on emerging markets. It's critical that we have solutions that are not dependent upon centralized entities, because one thing we have seen, so, I'm from the US, Lightning Labs is a global team, but we're a US company, is we've seen banks shut down, in the US, some of which failed, some of which were not necessarily insolvent, but the government decided, they have quote unquote crypto customers, and we don't necessarily like this bank. So I believe we're at a point right now where, people in the traditional, say, financial world used to think Bitcoin is too risky. Well, now banks might be too risky for Bitcoin, right? And that's why having peer-to-peer approaches is so critical, because without that, you're reliant on these centralized financial institutions for if you want to go to fiat, right? So to me, having the peer-to-peer component, which I believe BitNob also implements in with regard to, people are sending to each other's accounts as opposed to having one central entity, is at the end of the day going to be more censorship resistant. Now, if you're using the fiat system, it's not going to be censorship resistant in its entirety. That's just the nature of the fiat system. But having all of these options is critical. Otherwise, you're just going to have centralized entities that, either get shut down, or, you've got one dude who steals $8 to $10 billion, right? Or more. So, yeah. Now, another thing that I know a number of people in the community have thought about and are working on is something like a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin. And that, in a way, is in part like a holy grail, because then you're not even reliant on the fiat for fiat. But there's some approaches that people have already built and other ideas that people have posited to the community. Alex Gladstein, also at the Human Rights Foundation, a huge fan of his work. They've posted bounties as well for things like stable coins and Bitcoin-backed stable coins with Bitcoin and Lightning. So definitely check out their work.
Awesome. We
Can
got
I
a question
expand
from-
on that?
Sorry,
Sorry,
go ahead.
can I expand on that just a little? I've talked with the guys at Hodl Hodl, right? Do you think there's a way that you can do like, decentralized escrow service using Lightning?
Yeah, Hodl Hodl is similar, I believe, in nature to Paxful in terms
I
of the
see.
peer-to-peer component.
Yeah.
I know they had Lightning early on. I'm not sure if they still.
I mean, they took out Lightning because they said they can't do,
I don't think that
trustless.
they had Lightning early, and they'll come back. People always come back to Lightning. But yes, the idea being you're not dependent upon a central entity, and importantly, a central custodian, where banks are failing, or some guy goes and steals billions upon billions of dollars. Yeah, we don't want that. That's very anti-Bitcoin.
Awesome. We got a question from Sachin from River.
Yeah, my question was, what improvements do you think we need or are coming that will make running a Lightning node on your phone really feasible for the mass market? There's been a lot of UX problems with mobile nodes. Some teams handle it differently. What do you think we need or we will have soon that can fix those problems?
And by the way, when you say running a node, do you mean routing? Like, how are you defining running a node?
Self-custody on mobile is my main goal, and right now that means running a Lightning node in some form.
Right, okay. Because mobile routing is a bit more difficult in terms of uptime, bandwidth, especially if you look at places like emerging markets. So there are a number of approaches today for non-custodial Lightning on mobile. I mean, I'm sure folks have heard of Breeze, I've heard of Moon, a number of other approaches, right? And they use some different components, but on the L&D side, there's Neutrino, which has a light client technology. So Obviously, syncing to the chain with a mobile device is difficult. Some people have done it. But for an average user, that's going to be hard. So improvements in terms of like client support are key there. Also, sometimes with a phone, in terms of like, depending upon if it's Android or iOS, background processing, but and the requirement to be online, but also if the app is running in the background, that may not be accessible. So thinking through those constraints, but unfortunately some of those are on the, they're not on the Lightning and the Bitcoin side, they're actually on the mobile OS side. But people are thinking through solutions on that front. But at the end of the day, liquidity management is an obvious one there. For average users to have to think about the concept of channels and inbound liquidity is not necessarily something that a lot of people, we think about it as a community, but not everyone else will. So yeah, I think Breeze and Moon are great examples of non-custodial wallets that have greatly simplified the liquidity component. If you can get up and running and started with these apps and actually just receive, you have inbound capacity, they're enabling that. But to see that across more non-custodial wallets, I think would be key. And then potentially some degree of standardizing these approaches to liquidity in terms of non-custodial approaches to mobile phones, I think would be interesting there as well.
Awesome, we have a
I'm
couple.
a big fan of interoperability and standardization, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. So question from the back.
Thank you for the great interview. I have a question about, you mentioned before that the Lightning Network doesn't have a mechanism for consensus on the protocol. And so I was wondering how you work together with other implementations to
Oh no, what I
operate.
meant is a technical consensus.
Yeah, right.
The reason why Lightning scales is because you don't need consensus amongst participants. You just open a channel locally with each individual, as opposed to the Bitcoin base layer being a consensus protocol.
Yeah, I agree. And my question would be, how amongst the other implementation you decide on which upgrades you want to implement?
Oh, got it. Okay, so more like a social consensus, yeah.
All right.
So there are bi-weekly Bolt spec meetings they were on IRC, and now there's some on video as well, and anybody can participate. And those are really where a lot of those are hashed out. And then there's also, coming up in June in New York, going to be a Lightning Protocol Dev meeting. So there are these online forums and then IRL in-person forums where the protocol developer community can convene and talk about these various approaches and standardizations. I mean, it's pretty informal. It's not like there's any voting body that says we must do, it's kind of rough consensus and running code, which is the approach of the internet, and we've taken that in the Lightning protocol developer community. And look, I mean, again, there have been debates. Not everyone's going to always agree, and I think that makes the protocol stronger, but I would definitely recommend checking out the Bolt spec for those that are more technical, that want to see the standards that people have developed and how things are evolving. And some people may have heard of Bolt 12. I know we had so much to chat about, but that's being worked on for
half a
LND.
page left.
I know, right? There's some really amazing external contributors, including Carla from Chaincode, that have been working on Bolt 12. Blinded Paths, which enables receiver privacy, one key privacy upgrade for Lightning, I believe is coming in the next release, not the one that's about to come out, .17. Offers and invoices as well are coming soon in releases, potentially the one after that. And there will also be a standalone Bolt 12 version of LND that people can run even sooner to get those features. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the social consensus of the community, it's just more like people discuss, they debate, they come to an agreement, because at the end of the day, we are incentivized to interoperate. Like, we don't want to build a different Lightning network where the clients don't talk to each other. And again, I think that's what makes Bitcoin different from a lot of other communities out there, where everyone wants their own, in a way, walled garden, say layer 2. Lightning does not have a token. Lightning will not have. Lightning's token is Sats, right? So, and that is the kind of global currency and asset of the Lightning Network.
So we have a question over there from the gentleman in the corner there. Yep.
Thanks for your work, Elizabeth. So securities, they are issued in token form in many, many countries. Like companies like Citadel, they are launching these new tokenized securities using Avalanche blockchain, I think. And central governments, central banks of the major countries, they are issuing CBDCs, they're preparing for it, or they are already launching out, countries like China, right? I saw this from Nick Bhatia's book, Layered Money. The Lightning Network will be the place where atomic swap will be happening, combining all these different securities in token forms and CBDCs. They are atomically swapped on Lightning Network, but there's no technical explanation how that will actually happen. He just mentioned something about HTLC, and I don't know what's actually needed to.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that post. Now, look, the nature of Bitcoin and Lightning is anyone can build on top of it. If somebody wants to put a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, on Bitcoin and Lightning, we cannot stop them. That would be interesting. Personally, I'm not a fan of CBDCs broadly. I believe they're a vector for surveillance and control by governments, and Bitcoin and Lightning provide a much-needed alternative to that. We're also likely going to see the evolution of these and the digitization of fiat as things emerge. So, if somebody wants to put a CBDC on Bitcoin and Lightning with greater privacy, they can absolutely do it, right? And we cannot stop them. That would be interesting. So I don't know the post by Nick, but definitely suggest checking out Nick Bhatia's work with the Bitcoin layer. But what I envision is, what he was referring to is the ability to have assets on Bitcoin and Lightning, and there are a variety of approaches, including protocol that Lightning Labs has been working on for assets on Bitcoin and Lightning, and then the ability to have potentially submarine swaps, and to swap between either other chains, which he could be referring to, or potentially just having these assets on Bitcoin and Lightning and swapping between them. But again, I would have to see the post.
It's in the book, the last chapter.
It's the what? Oh, it's in his book.
It's in book.
Oh, got it. Okay, it's in his book. So that's what I would envision that he is referring to, having assets in Bitcoin and Lightning, and then swapping between them using hash time lock contracts.
Awesome. One final question from Dia in the back.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for the great interview. I just want to ask you a question. I think this is related to Southeast Asia and developing in general. So what I see, at least in Indonesia, that most good developer or good software developer are focusing on working in a big startup companies just because they can get a lot of monies, and not many people are actually interested in developing except those people who wants to work in a big startup. So what do you think is the best way to entice this developer to start building on Lightning, or what kind of characteristic that you see on the current developer right now, like where are they, what background that they came from, and what makes them want to build on Lightning?
Great question. We definitely want to get more developers participating in the community, more developers from Southeast Asia, and I would look to places like Chain Code Labs, who've done really great developer education with regard to both Bitcoin and Lightning. Jimmy's work in terms of writing books. Is there a Thai translation of your book? Okay, well maybe we can hook that up over here.
I'm actually
a Vietnamese translation
it.
as well, Tagalog, etc. To me, education is key here, right? So if you look at Kala in Africa, if you look at what Bob is doing, setting up these programs, and so Kala is more on the education front, and it seems like what Bob is doing is more on the resident front, but once they bring in the residents that have some experience, those residents will then have the potential to teach other members of the developer community. But education is key, because one thing that we see with Bitcoin and Lightning is there are all these, I like to call them latent Bitcoiners. They work at financial firms or startups, and they just spend their time like reading about Bitcoin, or they're on Bitcoin Twitter, they may be running a Lightning node, and they're looking for an opportunity to kind of jump over to Bitcoin and Lightning to make the leap. One other thing, we've seen this quote-unquote bear market, which now in Bitcoin has been less so, but that has really been a time of building for the community, and Lightning has been counter-cyclical. Lightning has been growing while there was a bear market, while even the Bitcoin price was going down, because developers like to build, and developers are focusing on the use cases, and the use cases are growing globally, right? So there's a decorrelation between just say price and then building and getting more developers and getting more use cases and applications. So now's a great time for anybody in the room that hasn't yet, made that leap to work on Bitcoin and Lightning. And to get these developers, I think it takes educational programs. I mean, we've seen there are initiatives in Brazil, Lucas from Lightning Labs, Andre, who I mentioned, and a number of other people, educating people there in Latin America, in Africa, and in Thailand with Bob. So in Indonesia, the ability to have developer education programs, there are things you can do virtually. There's some programs that they can join globally. Time zones might be a little bit different if it's online and virtual, but all of those could work. Also, there are a number of grant programs for people that are already developers, right? So Human Rights Foundation has given out a number of grants to the community. And there's B-Trust in Africa, there's Brink out of the UK, there are a number, BitMEX Research has given grants to developers. So there's funding out there for developers that want to get involved and contribute, but the first step is to really educate and grow this community, to show them what's possible, to show them what can be done, and then help them contribute either with grants or by joining people working in Bitcoin and Lightning.
Awesome. All right, guys, we'll wrap it up. Thank Elizabeth and Priyia for that great conversation.